Commander Vex 9 stared at the blinking red light on his console, wondering if his three eyes were finally failing him after 2 centuries of service. The scanner had been working perfectly fine for the last 800 years. 800 years. And now, on what was supposed to be a routine patrol through the outer rim of Sector 47, it decided to have what humans might call a moment. "Technician Blip, get over here," Vex barked, his mandibles clicking with irritation. "Your precious machine is acting up again." Blip scuttled over on his 6 legs, tool belt jingling like wind chimes in a hurricane. "Sir, I've told you 17 times this cycle. The scanner doesn't act up. It's a precision instrument calibrated to—" "Oh, spare me the technical lecture, you walking maintenance manual," Vex interrupted, gesturing at the display. "Then explain why it's showing a human signature on a ship that's clearly Zephyrian." The small, insect-like technician's compound eyes went wide. He leaned in close to the screen, his antennae twitching nervously. That's impossible, sir. Humans don't exist in this sector. Actually, they don't exist anywhere anymore." Vex's laugh was about as warm as a black hole. "Exactly my point, genius. So either your scanner is broken, or we're looking at the galaxy's most interesting ghost." The bridge fell silent, except for the steady hum of the engines and the occasional beep from various monitoring systems. Navigation Officer Quark looked up from her station, her purple skin taking on a slightly greenish tinge that indicated nervousness among her species. "Sir," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "what if the scanner isn't wrong?" "Don't be ridiculous, Quark," Vex replied, though his tone had lost some of its bite. "Humans were wiped out 300 years ago. Everyone knows that. The Galactic Council made sure of it after the incident." "The Titan War," Blip whispered, still staring at the scanner readout. "When they single-handedly held off the entire Vorthak Empire for 6 months, using nothing but scrap metal and what they called creative engineering." "And stubbornness," Quark added. "Don't forget the stubbornness. My grandfather used to tell stories about human traders who would argue with a neutron star if they thought it was charging unfair docking fees." Vex felt a chill run down his chitinous spine. He'd heard those stories too, though he'd always assumed they were exaggerated. Surely no species could be that persistent, that adaptable, that downright annoying in their refusal to accept defeat. "Sir," Communications Officer Zeph called out from across the bridge, his voice cracking like an adolescent's, "we're receiving a transmission from the ship." "Well, put it through," Vex snapped. "Let's see what kind of Zephyrian has managed to confuse our supposedly infallible scanner." The main screen flickered to life, revealing a figure that made Vex's heart skip a beat. 2 arms, 2 legs, 1 head positioned exactly where it should be, skin that wasn't quite gray but wasn't quite brown either, and most unsettling of all, 2 eyes that seemed to look right through him. "Greetings," the figure said in perfectly accented Galactic standard, though there was something in the pronunciation that seemed off, like listening to music played on instruments that were almost, but not quite, in tune. "I am Captain Maya Singh of the independent vessel Lucky 7. I understand you've been trying to scan my ship." Vex opened his mouth to respond, then closed it, then opened it again. He looked like a fish that had suddenly found itself in a philosophy class. "You're—" he started, then stopped. "You can't be—" "Human?" Maya Singh smiled, and Vex noticed that her teeth were remarkably white and straight. "Oh, I get that a lot these days. Apparently, we're supposed to be extinct or something. Funny how that works out." "This is impossible," Blip squeaked from his position at the scanner. "The records clearly state that all human colonies were destroyed During the Great Purge of 2387, the Council's forces were thorough. There were no survivors. Captain Singh's smile grew wider, and somehow that made it infinitely more terrifying. Thorough, you say? Well, I suppose that depends on your definition of thorough. See, the thing about us humans is that we have this annoying habit of being exactly where we're not supposed to be. Quark leaned forward in her seat. But how did you survive? Where have you been hiding? Hiding? Singh laughed, and the sound sent shivers through the bridge crew. Oh, my dear purple friend, who said anything about hiding? We've been right here the whole time. Trading, exploring, making friends. Well, mostly making friends. Sometimes we make other things, but let's not get into that right now. Vex felt his mandibles begin to chatter involuntarily. Right here? In plain sight? Best place to hide, don't you think? Singh leaned back in what appeared to be a pilot's chair that had seen better decades. You see, Commander, your council made a critical error in their calculations. They assumed that humans would behave like every other species they'd encountered. Logical, predictable, willing to accept defeat when faced with overwhelming odds. And you're not? Zeph asked, his voice barely audible. Oh, we're many things, Singh replied, examining her fingernails with the casual interest of someone discussing the weather. But logical? Predictable? Willing to accept defeat? She looked directly into the camera, her eyes seeming to bore right through the screen. Not so much. The silence on the bridge was so complete that Vex could hear his own circulatory system pumping fluid through his body. Finally, he managed to find his voice. What do you want? Want? Singh tilted her head to one side, like a predator studying prey. Commander, I don't want anything from you. I'm simply passing through your lovely little corner of space, minding my own business, when your scanner decides to get all excited about my species' signature. Which, by the way, is remarkably rude. Didn't anyone ever teach you that it's impolite to scan someone without asking first? Our scanner automatically identifies all vessels in this sector, Vex replied stiffly. It's standard protocol. Ah, yes, protocols, Singh nodded sagely. Humans have those too. Would you like to hear about them? Something in her tone made Vex's skin crawl. What kind of protocols? Oh, the usual sorts of things. How to respond when someone scans you without permission. How to deal with species that assume you're extinct. How to handle situations where someone might be thinking about calling in your location to certain governing bodies who have strong opinions about your continued existence. Her smile never wavered, but her eyes had gone cold. Very comprehensive protocols, really. We've had a lot of time to work on them. Blip's antennae were now twitching so rapidly they were almost a blur. Sir, should I contact Fleet Command? The question hung in the air like a toxic gas cloud. Vex looked at the human on the screen, noting the way she seemed perfectly relaxed despite being outnumbered, outgunned, and supposedly extinct. There was something about her casual confidence that reminded him of stories his own grandfather had told about human merchants who would walk into a room full of armed pirates and somehow walk out with the pirate's ship. That's entirely up to you, Commander, Singh said pleasantly. Though I should probably mention that my ship's communications array has been acting up lately. Very unreliable. Sometimes signals get through, sometimes they don't. Sometimes they get redirected to places they weren't meant to go. Technology can be so unpredictable, don't you think? Are you threatening me? Vex asked, though his voice came out more like a squeak than the commanding bark he'd intended. Threatening? Singh looked genuinely surprised. Commander, I'm having a friendly conversation with a fellow space traveler. If that feels threatening to you, well, that might say more about your own intentions than mine. Quark spoke up from her station. Captain Singh, if you don't mind me asking, how many humans are left? Singh's expression softened slightly. That's a very good question, navigation officer. The answer depends on how you define left. Are we talking about humans living on traditional colony worlds? Humans integrated into other species' societies? Humans living in places that don't officially exist on any star charts? Or are we talking about humans who have decided that the old ways of doing things weren't quite working out and have found new and interesting approaches to survival? All of them? Quark replied uncertainly. Singh tapped her chin thoughtfully. Let me put it this way. Remember how the Council's forces reported that they had eliminated every human colony, every human ship, every trace of human civilization? Yes, Vex replied cautiously. They weren't lying, Singh said. They did exactly that. Very thorough job, really. Quite impressive in its scope and execution. The bridge crew exchanged confused glances. If that was true, then how was she sitting there talking to them? Singh seemed to read their thoughts. The thing is, Commander, the Council made their plans based on the assumption that humans would continue to be human in the same way they'd always been human. They calculated for human colonies, human ships, human civilization as they understood it. But, Zeph prompted, but humans have this peculiar trait called adaptability. When our traditional colonies were destroyed, we adapted. When our ships were hunted down, we adapted. When our civilization was scattered to the stellar winds, we adapted. Singh's smile returned, sharper than before. The Council eliminated human civilization as they knew it. They just forgot to account for what human civilization might become. Blip's compound eyes were now focused entirely on his scanner readings. Sir, I'm detecting additional ships moving into the area. Zephyrian vessels? Vex asked hopefully. No, sir, Blip replied, his voice barely a whisper. The signatures are mixed. Multiple species, but all showing the same anomalous readings as Captain Singh's ship. Vex felt his knees go weak. How many ships? 17. No, 23. Sir, they keep appearing. My scanner can't seem to get a fixed count. Singh's laugh filled the bridge, warm and friendly, and absolutely terrifying. Oh, you'll love this part, Commander. See? Humans have this saying about strength in numbers. But we also have this other saying about not keeping all your eggs in one basket. So when we rebuilt, we made sure to spread out, way out. And we made friends. Lots of friends. Friends? Quark whispered. Oh, yes. Species that the Council had written off as primitive or irrelevant or just plain inconvenient. Turns out, when you're all hiding from the same people, you tend to develop a certain camaraderie. Plus, humans have always been remarkably good at convincing others to see things our way. You mean you've been building an alliance? Vex said, the full implications finally hitting him. Alliance is such a formal word, Singh replied. I prefer to think of it as a very large, very extended, very unconventional family. The kind of family that looks out for each other. The kind that doesn't like it when someone threatens one of their own. The tactical display began lighting up with contact signatures. Ships of a dozen different configurations, some that Vex recognized and others that seemed to be cobbled together from parts of multiple vessel types. But they all shared one thing in common. They all showed the same scanner anomaly that had started this entire conversation. How? Vex asked, his voice barely audible. How did you hide an entire fleet? We didn't hide it, Commander, Singh replied. "We disguised it. Do you know the difference between a human cargo hauler and a Vorthak battle cruiser? About 6 months and a really creative engineering team. Do you know the difference between a mining consortium and a military force? About as much as you'd expect from a species that turned asteroid mining into an art form during the war." Zeph looked up from his communications console, his face pale. "Sir, Fleet Command is requesting a status report." Singh leaned forward slightly. "This is where things get interesting, Commander. You have several choices. You can report that you've encountered an extinct species that apparently didn't get the memo about being extinct. You can call for backup and see how your superiors react to the news that their most successful genocide wasn't quite as successful as they thought. Or, Vex prompted, or you can file a routine patrol report stating that you encountered a few independent traders of mixed species origin, exchanged pleasantries, and continued on your way. No scanner anomalies, no extinct species, no need for Fleet Command to get their tentacles in a twist." The silence stretched on for several heartbeats. Finally, Quark spoke up. "What happens if we choose the first option?" Singh's smile vanished completely. "Then you learn why humans have such a reputation for being persistent. See, the thing about being supposedly extinct is that it means you don't officially exist. And if you don't officially exist, then anything you do doesn't officially happen, which creates all sorts of interesting possibilities for response strategies." "And if we choose the second option?" Vex asked. The smile returned, warmer than before. "Then we all continue going about our business, and everyone stays happy and healthy and breathing. Plus, I might mention to some friends of mine that there are still reasonable beings in Council space, the kind of beings who understand that sometimes the official version of events isn't the only version that matters." Vex looked around his bridge at his crew. Blip's antennae had finally stopped twitching, but his eyes remained fixed on the scanner readings. Quark was studying her navigation charts with unusual intensity. Zeph was staring at his communications console as if it might suddenly burst into flames. "The scanner readings," Vex said finally. "How do we explain those?" "Equipment malfunction," Singh replied without hesitation. "Happens all the time. Cosmic radiation, magnetic fluctuations, general wear and tear on sensitive instruments. I'm sure your technician could come up with a dozen perfectly reasonable explanations for anomalous readings." Blip looked up from his console. "Actually, sir, there have been reports of scanning irregularities in this sector. Something about unusual gravitational fields from the nearby nebula affecting sensor calibrations." "There you go," Singh said brightly. "Problem solved. Your scanner had a little hiccup. You're filing a report to get it recalibrated, and life goes on." Vex closed his eyes and tried to think. The smart thing, the safe thing, would be to report this immediately. Let Fleet Command deal with the implications of discovering that humanity wasn't as extinct as everyone believed. But he'd heard the stories about what happened to officers who brought inconvenient truths to their superiors' attention. And he'd also heard the other stories, the ones about what humans did when they felt cornered. "Commander," Zeph called out urgently, "Fleet Command is requesting immediate confirmation of our status." Singh leaned back in her chair. "Your call, Commander. But I should probably mention that my friends out there are getting a bit anxious. They're not used to waiting this long for social situations to resolve themselves." As if summoned by her words, the tactical display updated again. The 23 ships had arranged themselves in a perfect sphere around Vex's patrol vessel. Not threatening, exactly, but definitely present, and definitely capable of turning his ship into component atoms if the conversation took a wrong turn. Vex looked at the display, then at Singh, then at his crew, then back at Singh. The human woman sat calmly in her chair, hands folded in her lap, looking for all the world like someone waiting for a friend to decide where to go for dinner. "You know," Vex said slowly, "I've always thought our scanners were a bit unreliable in this sector." Singh's smile could have powered a small space station. "Funny how that works out." "Well then," Singh said, clapping her hands together with the enthusiasm of someone who had just solved a particularly challenging puzzle, "I'm glad we could reach an understanding. Zeph, was it? You might want to send that routine patrol report now, before your fleet command gets impatient." Zeph's fingers hovered over his console like a pianist about to perform a concerto he'd never practiced. "What exactly should I tell them?" "The truth," Singh replied with mock seriousness. "Just not all of it. Routine patrol, sector clear, minor scanner calibration issues detected, requesting maintenance check upon return. Standard bureaucratic language that will put everyone to sleep." Vex watched his communications officer type the message, each keystroke feeling like a step across a minefield. "Captain Singh, I have to ask, what's your end game here? You could have stayed hidden forever. Why reveal yourselves now?" Singh's expression shifted, becoming more thoughtful. "Commander, have you ever tried to hold your breath underwater? At first it's easy. You're focused, determined, ready to prove you can do it. But eventually, your lungs start burning, your body starts screaming for air, and you realize that hiding isn't living. It's just a very slow way of dying." "So you decided to surface," Quark observed. "We decided to test the waters," Singh corrected. "See how the galaxy has changed in 3 centuries. Whether the same people who ordered our extinction are still calling the shots, or if maybe, just maybe, enough time has passed for cooler heads to prevail." Blip looked up from his scanner, his compound eyes reflecting the console lights like tiny disco balls. "And what have you found?" "Mixed results," Singh admitted. "Some sectors are still run by the same paranoid bureaucrats who think the best solution to any problem is to blow it up. Others have new leadership, new perspectives. Some places have even started asking uncomfortable questions about the official history." "What kind of questions?" Vex asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted to know the answer. Questions like why humanity had to be completely eliminated instead of just contained. Questions about whether the Titan War was really as one-sided as the official reports claimed. Questions about what other inconvenient truths might be buried in classified archives. Singh's smile turned predatory. "Turns out, when you dig into the historical records, the story gets a lot more complicated." A soft chime indicated that Zeph's message had been transmitted. He looked up nervously. "Message sent, sir. Fleet Command acknowledges receipt and confirms we're cleared to continue patrol." "Excellent," Singh said. "See how easy that was? No drama, no explosions, no uncomfortable explanations to superior officers. Everyone wins." But Vex wasn't ready to let this go. 3 centuries of lies and cover-ups had just been casually revealed, and he needed to understand the implications. "Captain, you mentioned that the Council eliminated human civilization as they knew it. What exactly does that mean?" Singh stood up from her chair and walked to what appeared to be a viewport, though Vex couldn't see what she was looking at. "It means they destroyed our cities, our planets, our ships, our government structures, everything that made us recognizably human, according to their understanding of what humanity was." "But you survived," Quark said. "We evolved," Singh corrected. "When you can't live in cities, you learn to live in ships. When you can't have planets, you learn to make space itself your home. When your government is destroyed, you learn to govern yourselves in smaller, more flexible groups. When your technology is hunted, you learn to build things that don't look like technology. She turned back to face the camera, and Vex noticed something he'd missed before. Her clothing looked simple, almost primitive, but there were subtle details that suggested advanced manufacturing. Her ship's bridge appeared cobbled together, but every component was positioned with mathematical precision. The Council thought they understood humans, Singh continued. They saw our expansion, our technology, our military capabilities, and they categorized us the same way they'd categorized every other spacefaring species. But they missed the most important thing about us. Which was, Zeph asked. We're not just adaptable to new environments, Commander. We're adaptable to new ways of being human. The Council destroyed human civilization, so we created something that wasn't quite civilization and wasn't quite human, but was definitely us. Singh's eyes gleamed with something that might have been amusement, or might have been madness. We became something they had no protocols for dealing with. Blip's antennae started twitching again. Sir, I'm reading some kind of energy buildup from the surrounding ships. Not weapons signatures, but something else. Oh, that's just the welcoming committee getting ready, Singh said casually. Commander, you've been very reasonable about this whole situation, so I thought you might like to see something interesting. Define interesting, Vex said warily. How about a demonstration of what 300 years of creative engineering looks like when practiced by a species with a grudge and too much free time? Before Vex could object, the main screen split into multiple views showing different ships from Singh's fleet. What he saw made his mandibles drop open in shock. One ship was literally unfolding like an origami sculpture, revealing internal structures that defied every principle of starship design he'd ever learned. Another was growing. Actually growing, as if it were some kind of technological organism. A third was flickering in and out of visible spectrum, while a fourth appeared to be rearranging its molecular structure in real time. What in the seven hells are we looking at? Vex whispered. Innovation, Singh replied cheerfully. When you can't build ships the traditional way, you learn to build them in ways that make no sense to anyone else. When you can't use standard materials, you learn to use materials that don't officially exist. When you can't follow established engineering principles, you learn to break them so creatively that the universe itself isn't quite sure how to respond. Quark was frantically checking her navigation instruments. Commander, according to my readings, some of those ships shouldn't be able to maintain structural integrity. The physics don't work. Ah, yes, physics, Singh nodded sagely. Humans have always had a complicated relationship with physics. We tend to view natural laws more as strongly worded suggestions than absolute rules. The ship that had been folding and unfolding suddenly stopped its transformation. In its final configuration, it looked like nothing Vex had ever seen before. Part spaceship, part space station, part something that might have been alive. That's the new Harmony, Singh said proudly. She's our mobile research facility. 300 years of accumulated knowledge about things the Council would prefer didn't exist. Alternative physics, impossible technologies, creative solutions to problems that aren't supposed to have solutions. And the growing ship? Zeph asked, mesmerized. That's the Persistence. She's our manufacturing vessel. Give her raw materials and enough time, and she can build anything you can imagine, and several things you can't. The crew calls her Persis for short. She likes that better. Vex caught the pronoun usage. She likes it? Oh, yes, Singh said matter-of-factly. Turns out, When you spend enough time integrating organic and technological systems, the line between the two gets a bit blurry. Persis developed preferences somewhere around year 50. We think it's charming. You've created sentient ships? Blip squeaked. We've created a lot of things, Singh replied. Sentient ships are actually some of the less controversial projects. Wait until you hear about our experiments with temporal mechanics and probability manipulation. The implications were staggering. Not only had humanity survived, they'd spent 3 centuries developing technologies that the rest of the galaxy couldn't even comprehend. They'd become something beyond what anyone had imagined possible. Captain Singh, Vex said slowly, what do you want from the galaxy? What's your intention here? Singh's expression became serious for the first time in the conversation. Commander, 300 years ago, the Galactic Council decided that humanity was too dangerous to be allowed to exist. They may have been right, but they made one critical error in their calculations. Which was? They assumed that eliminating us would make the galaxy safer. Instead, they forced us to become something far more dangerous than we ever were before. We were explorers, traders, colonists. Annoying, perhaps, but relatively harmless. Now? She gestured toward the impossible fleet surrounding them. Now we're something the galaxy has never encountered before. And what's that? Quark asked. We're the thing that happens when you try to completely destroy a species that refuses to be destroyed. We're 3 centuries of accumulated survival instincts, creative desperation, and really, really good grudge-holding abilities. Singh's smile was sharp enough to cut through hull plating. We're what humanity becomes when you give it enough time to get creative about the concept of revenge. The word hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Vex felt his circulation system pump harder as the full meaning sank in. So this is about revenge, he said. This is about justice, Singh corrected. The Council committed genocide based on fear and paranoia. They destroyed entire worlds, eliminated billions of beings, and then spent 3 centuries congratulating themselves on making the galaxy safer. But they left survivors, Commander. And survivors remember. What are you planning to do? Zeph asked. That depends, Singh replied, on what the galaxy chooses to do about the truth. See, we've spent the last 50 years carefully documenting everything that really happened during the Titan War. The real casualties, the actual threat assessments, the behind-the-scenes decision-making processes. Turns out, when you have unlimited time and extremely advanced technology, you can uncover all sorts of interesting historical facts. She walked back to her chair and sat down. The official story is that humanity was a growing threat that had to be eliminated before they could endanger galactic stability. The real story is that humanity was asking uncomfortable questions about Council authority and had developed technologies that certain people found politically inconvenient. You're talking about exposing classified information, Vex said. I'm talking about exposing the truth, Singh countered. The galaxy deserves to know what was done in their name. They deserve to know that the Council's great victory was actually the systematic murder of an entire species whose only crime was being too successful at things the Council couldn't control. Blip looked up from his console. But if you release that information, it could destabilize the entire galactic government. Yes, Singh agreed cheerfully. It could. Funny how that works out. The silence that followed was broken by a soft chime from Zeph's communications console. He checked the display and paled. Sir, we're receiving priority transmission from Fleet Command. They're requesting detailed sensor logs from our patrol. Singh raised an eyebrow. That's interesting timing. Almost like someone, somewhere, got nervous about a routine patrol report. Vex felt pieces clicking together in his mind. You're not just randomly encountering patrol ships, are you? This was planned. Commander, give me some credit. We've been watching Council fleet movements for decades. We know which ships patrol which sectors, which crews are likely to be reasonable, and which ones would start shooting first and ask questions later. Your ship was selected very carefully. Selected for what? Quark demanded. To be the first official contact between the new humanity and the Galactic Council in 300 years. Congratulations, you're all about to become historically significant. The communications console chimed again, more insistently this time. Sir, Zeph said nervously, Fleet Command is demanding immediate response. Singh stood up again, her casual demeanor replaced by something harder and more focused. Commander, this is where we find out what kind of galaxy we're living in. You can tell them the truth about what you've encountered here, in which case things are about to get very interesting for everyone involved. Or you can maintain your story about scanner malfunctions and routine patrols, in which case we continue testing other sectors until we find someone willing to have an honest conversation. And if we choose the truth, Vex asked, then you become the bridge between old humanity and new humanity, between the Council's version of history and what actually happened, between the galaxy that was and the galaxy that could be. Singh's eyes were intense now, focused with laser precision. You become the people who help decide whether the next chapter of galactic history is written in diplomacy or written in plasma fire. Vex looked around his bridge one more time. His crew was waiting for his decision, but he could see in their faces that they'd already made their choice. Blip's antennae had stopped twitching, and he was staring at Singh with something like admiration. Quark was checking weapon signatures on the surrounding fleet with professional curiosity rather than fear. And Zeph? Zeph was already composing a new message. What are you writing? Vex asked. The truth, sir, Zeph replied without looking up. All of it. Fleet Command wanted detailed sensor logs. They're about to get the most detailed sensor logs in Council history. Singh's smile returned, warmer than before. Commander, I think you and your crew are going to fit right in with the new order of things. The transmission went out with the soft chime of a message sent. Within moments, Vex's console began lighting up with priority alerts, emergency protocols, and urgent requests for clarification. Well, Singh said, settling back into her chair with obvious satisfaction, it looks like the galaxy is about to become a much more interesting place. As alarms began sounding throughout the Council fleet, as emergency sessions were called and classified files were hastily reviewed, as the comfortable certainties of 3 centuries began crumbling under the weight of inconvenient truths, Captain Maya Singh smiled and began making plans for humanity's official return to galactic society. After all, they'd had 300 years to prepare, and humans had always been very, very good at making an entrance.